and trying to regenerate an interest in that history of living together, as opposed to the mainstream history of really trying to say that this has always been a hostile and confrontational relationship.
You're listening to Worldview from Chicago Public Radio. I'm Andrea Wenzel. I'm speaking with Sunila Abisekara. Sunila is the director of the human rights group Inform, and we're also speaking with Fred Abrahams from Human Rights Watch. So if we're talking about how there is this rich history of multi-ethnic relationships and everything, and when you hear about people doing studies on public opinion about, how things are going with the government, and it sounds like most people actually, a lot of people seem to kind of want peace, anecdotally at least. Where is this coming from? Is this all just come down to politics and politicians? And what do you think about this? Is there any possibility for change?
Well, I think that actually most people in Sri Lanka are not directly affected by the conflict. Increasingly, though, that is changing because the economic situation in Sri Lanka is really bad in this moment. The cost of living is sky high, and the numbers of soldiers who are dying and who are being brought back home in coffins to small villages throughout the south of the island is growing. And I think it's very sad, but that cost needs to be extracted from people in the south to really get them to want to shift something about how they engage with their politicians with regard to the war. I think sadly what we're seeing happening in the last years is that there's a collapse of democratic institutions in Sri Lanka. And the institutions that could take a stand not only against the conflict but against violations of human rights, restrictions on the freedom of expression, erosion of the independence of the judiciary, all those things, the institutions have been really undermined by a range of emergency regulations that are promulgated with indecent haste and without much conversation or dialogue in Parliament. Parliament is very ineffective, and the more and more power is centralized in the hands of two men. One is President Rajapaksa in the south, and one is Velupillai Prabhaharan in the north. And I think when you have such a polarized situation between the two main contenders in the conflict, then the only way that the other smaller parties can respond is by becoming even more extreme. So in the south, for example, you have seen the emergence of really ultra-Buddhist, ultra-Sinhala nationalist groups that are completely opposed to any conversation with the LTTE. And in the northern east, with the Tamil community and with the Muslim community, you have the formation of ethnic-based political parties that are exclusive. I think that they have nothing else to do but to become even more hardened within their own little ethnic box. And I think that's why it becomes so difficult to imagine the space in which a voice can emerge that says, we can still live together harmoniously, because the last 20 years have painted each of the communities more and more firmly into their own little corner.
One thing Human Rights Watch has called for is you've called for a UN monitoring mission to come in. But the Sri Lankan government already has a Human Rights Commission. Why does it need the UN to come in?
The basic logic is that the institutions in Sri Lanka, if not have collapsed, they are not functioning. They are not functioning. For example, when a person is abducted or disappeared, very often, and we've interviewed, Sunila and I have interviewed these families, people will go to the police. And the police, either they say, well, no time to take your complaint, or they take the complaint and do nothing with it. So the police are not functioning. The prosecution is not functioning. The courts are not functioning. You're right that Sri Lanka has what's called a Human Rights Commission, which is a government body mandated to investigate human rights violations. It's not functioning. The government has taken very concrete steps to undermine the Human Rights Commission's independence through the appointment of its members. So these institutions are not doing their jobs. And that's why we believe that an outside monitoring mission is necessary. We believe the United Nations is the body to do it. Specifically, the High Commissioner for Human Rights should send a large-scale mission. And the idea is to monitor both sides, that this will be an outlet for citizens to register their complaints, and it will act as a coolant on the heated atmosphere that is growing hotter by the day. So very simply, if the actors, the parties to the conflict, know that somebody's there watching, they will think twice before disappearing someone, abducting someone, attacking civilians, or any other human rights violation.
I just want to, Sunila, it's not easy to be a human rights activist, and then you are putting yourself at risk. Have there been times when you've been worried about yourself?
Oh yeah, many times. Our office, everybody that I work with has been under threat, and a couple of times our office has been surrounded once by a mob of very angry Buddhist monks in the early years of our existence in the 1990s. But personally also, yes, I think there have been moments when I have actually feared for my life. I left Sri Lanka in 1987 for 6 months because of death threats, and then I came back. And right now, there's a huge campaign against all of us who do human rights work, because I think the government really is clear that we are doing something in the international community that is making them have to face up to uncomfortable truths that are asked by ambassadors and by the UN and so forth. So there's a big campaign of vilification, and there are death threats, phones, emails. I don't think what can you do? You can either stop doing what you do, you could leave, or you could continue doing what you do. So I think the options are really limited. I don't want to leave Sri Lanka, and I don't want to stop doing what I'm doing. So, for me, it's really an easy choice. I think sometimes for younger people, it's much more difficult, especially if you have young families and things like that. I'm really so glad my kids are grown and I'm once more an independent person, and I don't really have to, think twice about doing what I do and just say, I'm going to do what I'm going to do.
So you're going to keep going. So are you hopeful about the future?
Well, yes, I think I am. It's really, Sri Lanka is such a horribly depressing place to live in. But in the kind of work that I do, I always encounter people with such courage and such resilience. And, I am astonished and humbled each time, because I have many things that protect me. I'm a middle-class person. I live and work in Colombo. I am known outside the world. So even if I were to be killed or disappeared, there would be a little bit of, stir. At least for a few days, right? People Fred would be saying, what happened to her? But, I work with a lot of people who are not known, who are not safe, who live out there in the eastern province in small huts with doors that can be kicked down with one kick, And they dare. They dare to tell us their stories. They dare to take a stand. They dare to come to Colombo and stand in a line in a demonstration. And, sometimes I work with people who have lost so much over and over and over again, and they always still get up and go. So I think, for me, the thing is that there is such amazing courage in people, and, in terms of what I go through nothing. So I need to go on.
Well, Fred, Sunila, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sunila Abisekara directs the Sri Lankan human rights group Inform. She was touring the U.S. with Human Rights Watch's Fred Abrahams. Fred is a senior researcher for Human Rights Watch's Emergencies program.